afternoon. We're ready to start the March, I guess it is, Waterworks Board of Trustee meeting. And with that, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Bill, is there anything you wanted to pull from it?
Nothing to pull from it, Madam Chair.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Next, public comment period, and unless we have a staff member interested in speaking, I see our mayor is here. But anyone else from the public interested in speaking? All right, moving along, I would ask permission from the board to move item F, I'm sorry,
D.
Item D up. I believe Mayor County would like to speak on item D, so.
Or is it your preference, Mayor, to hear a little bit of the board's discussion? And
I think I'd like to hear a little of the board's discussion, and that being, sort of a follow-up to our joint meeting. I think it'd be important to kind of get a little feedback.
Okay.
happy to do that. Can I just kind of square it up, and then we'll handle it in that way. As you know, board item 3D is the staff recommendation for approval of a second phase of consulting agreement with FCS Financial Consultant Services, Jason Munn in particular, to move forward with the process of facilitating a discussion on regional water governance. Certainly the phase 2 documents that you have indicate a focus on the economics of regional production in particular as the kind of forefront of phase 2. I've had some discussions, I think, with all of you on and off on this. I certainly don't see phase 2 as being the terminal phase necessarily in discussions. And I certainly also understand some concern about whether FCS has the complete capability to answer every question that may come up relative to asset transfer or to the economics of the discussion. I certainly understand that there can be an assets valuation fight out there in the future if this continues to move forward. Ultimately, the business decision that you'll have to make on behalf of Des Moines ratepayers, I think, requires the type of analysis that we're moving to with phase 2 of the discussion. I do believe, after talking with a number of folks also, that, and hearing your reservations, that I think it's incumbent on this board, the Urbandale Water Board and the West Des Moines Water Board, if you choose to move forward, to perhaps meet, whether it's jointly or meet through chairs, to talk about potential amendments in the agreement to chase down issues that are unresolved and may be important to each of you. That may be a change order in the future going forward. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions on the proposal itself, but again, this has a staff support, not the least of which is we need the information, and I'm very concerned that the rejection by this body of the FCS proposal will effectively stop further discussions about regional water production going forward, at least for the foreseeable future. Certainly it may or may not send a signal to the Iowa legislature, and I think that you are deep enough into these discussions. Having real data is going to be important moving forward. Again, happy to answer any questions you may have. I think the financials are in front of you. Again, assuming this were to move forward, the economic cost out of pocket to Des Moines Waterworks from all the phases here would be about $125,000, at least the phases that have been identified. Without regard to what you choose on the contract itself, I would ask your consideration to essentially pay FCS and Jason for the gap, if you will, between the expiration of the agreement at the end of last year and the work he's put into it to date before the extension or rejection, whatever it may be, of phase 2. And I think that's about a $21,000 payment.
That's part of the 200.
It is not. It is not.
So in addition to the 200. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Graham. If you look at the, I know the yellow sheet for you isn't yellow.
That's fine. I just wanted to be clear.
There, in fact, is provision here about, it looks like $10,000, I'm sorry. I do want to note that we are one member short here. Certainly, your deliberation is going to be very important, and the outcome of that deliberation is important. From my vantage, under the existing rules of the board, if this were to lock up on a 2-2 issue, I believe that it's appropriate to bring it back for reconsideration or redebate with a full board here, so that at least there's a clear indication of what the majority of the board is on this issue, should you reach that level of indecision, at least collectively, with a 2-2 tie. So again, happy to answer any questions you may have.
So in order to get into discussion, I'm looking for a motion to request authorization for the CEO, General Manager, to execute a consulting contract agreement with FCS Group for Regional Water Production Work Group Phase 2.
So moved.
Second.
Madam Chair, could I make a couple of comments specific to this discussion item?
Sure. Usually we put a motion on the table first and then get into
Well, it sounded like you
discussions.
got one.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I believe under our rules, Madam Chair, and Rick, please interrupt me if I have an incorrect interpretation of that. The chair may second the motion.
Yes.
And I second it.
Mr. Mayor.
Here we are back again, and good to see the board is again deliberating and representing our citizens of the city of Des Moines and all the customers of Des Moines Waterworks. I think that we've worked real hard for quite a long period of time, and I remember Graham and Bill and I spending some time with some folks with one of our customers who had purchased a piece of ground, and we were thinking about what the future of water production looked like and how important it was that we have a adequate quantity, top quality, and well-priced, right-priced, if you will, water for the foreseeable future for all of our customers and, for me, selfishly, the residents of the city of Des Moines. And I think that in our discussions that following bringing together our regional customers and trying to see where we could go with this, certainly there's a variety of different opinions on how things should move forward and what governance looks like and what representation looks like. But I think in our joint meeting that we had, one of the real critical points that was brought up by a couple of my council members, and I think we've all discussed a little bit, is value of assets and what that means moving forward, not only our assets, but whatever assets Urbandale may have, whatever assets in terms of production that West Des Moines may have, or any of the other people in the region that are participating and may have assets. Certainly they probably want to know where they stand on that as well. And I think as concerns were brought up in our joint meeting, it became pretty clear that we needed to move forward to get value of assets, because without the value of the assets, it's hard to figure out all the other pieces. And I think that as the director pointed out in the middle of it, when one of my council members was very concerned about assets, not once, twice, but 3 times, he pointed out each time that that's kind of where we're going. We had the old Black and Veatch study that not everybody loved, and we needed to have a current value of some of those things so that the assets of Des Moines, the Des Moines Waterworks, are appropriately represented, and that, for me, that the customers of the city of Des Moines are appropriately represented on how we move forward with expansion on production that may be necessary in the future and what that looks like and who pays for it and how that works. But I think without moving it forward, I'm not sure how we get there. And without those cards on the table, I'd hate to see this group break up over, not being able to put proper value on those assets and have it be recognized by the whole body that's in deliberation. So, and not only for that body of those that have been discussing the regional governance, but is importantly my own city council, I think, asked for that kind of information, and it sounds like this, at least in part, is going to be the directive to your contractor to do this work. So I would hope that you can move this forward, so and with appropriate guides, so that we get some direction in terms of outcome on things that may be of concern to any member of this board, and answer some of the questions to the members of my council. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.
If I may, Mayor, you bring up a couple of good points that I agree with, and that is this need to do evaluation and to find some new numbers. One of my concerns here, and I want to know if you share this concern, and maybe we can ask Bill to expound on this. The FCS contract does not produce any new valuation. It uses the information that is already on hand, thereby things like the Black and Beach study and others to come up with this valuation. A couple times in your comments, you talked about the need to create that new valuation. And my concern is this contract does not do that. Do you have the same feeling, having looked at the contract?
Well, I'm not quite sure what all the contract, the detail of it are, and I would presume that we would want to put some of those details on it. But there is concern on the part of, sounds like maybe some of you on the board, but certainly members of my council, and was appropriately, I think, addressed by your director, that that is one of the issues that will be sorted out, whether it's sort of a revisit of the Black and Beach study, or whether it's valuing assets in some other fashion or manner that recognizes a long-term invested value that this organization, Des Moines Water Works, has put forth to serve the citizens of the city of Des Moines and the region. And what is that worth today, and what is it worth moving forward? And I guess I would turn to the director to ask him if that is in fact going to be part and parcel to some of the information that we get back.
I think the easy answer to your question, Mayor, to your question, Graham, is yes, there'll be a valuation process, but it will not be, in my view, plant by plant or facility by facility like the Black and Beach report was. That is, as we talked about before, a 10 million gallon per day plant, whether it's in West Des Moines or whether it's in Saylor Township, are equally valued at the level of deciding what the contribution will be from each producing community. At the end of the day, there'll be something that I think Jason calls surplus capacity that some communities will have that has to be valued. The valuation process, again, I don't think is an engineering process so much as, if you'll remember, Jason made clear in some of the kind of early discussions in this process the difference between fair market price and fair price, some kind of negotiated agreement about what this excess surplus capacity should be worth. All of which is to say, I think that there has been a significant departure from the Black and Beach. What is the AC Ward plant worth? What is Des Moines Saylorville plant worth? What is the Altoona plant worth? There's been a departure that what they're essentially worth is their output. And some communities will have the ability to contribute more output in this process, giving them a value that has to be realized in a fair pricing process. So a long answer to a pretty complicated question, but I think, Graham, in the response that you got from Jason as to Black and Beach and engineering capability, they certainly are in a position to use that as part of their baseline, if you will, for looking at fair pricing when we get there. But there is not this same sense of valuing a price and of a pipe in the West Des Moines system versus a particular pipe in the Des Moines system. That is really being set aside in this process, looking at 10 million gallons per day is 10 million gallons a day, whether it's in a pristine plant, whatever that may be, or a more rugged plant, Michael, I believe was your modifier from a week or two ago. Those kind of distinctions are being set aside. They're both 10 MGD plants, but at the end of the day, Des Moines and our ratepayers will have a surplus of production capacity that really is to be valued for other communities like Johnston, like whomever. And I think that is kind of one of the critical aspects of Phase 2. But another critical aspect of Phase 2, as you can tell by how Jason has scoped it, is his continued need to argue to some of the people at the table that production at a higher level with economies of scale in a regional utility is good for smaller communities. That's one of the hurdles that he's trying to get us across in the process. I do understand that there are reservations about how to move it forward. I very much appreciate that, Graham. I know you and I agree on the skills and capabilities that Black and Veatch brought to this earlier. What Jason is trying to reassure us is that all of that won't necessarily be lost in the process, but he's definitely taking a different approach, that 10 MGD plant capacity, whether it's in West Des Moines or whether it's in Des Moines, are fungible. They're equal without regard to a precise financial or engineering determination of what the real difference is in market pricing, if you will, between the 10 MGD in West Des Moines versus Saylor Township.
But I don't want to mislead anybody, because I think it's kind of counter to what the mayor said in his comments, but I don't want to mislead anybody. This phase of this project does not produce any new research. It does not do any type of new analysis. It's going to rely on all of what Jason from FCS referred to, existing inputs that are out there. So it would be incorrect to assume there's going to be some sort of new information that is uncovered during this Phase 2 that would get us to evaluation.
My vantage, and only my vantage, and certainly challenge me on this as you want. I think it's one issue to say there won't be new asset valuation in the process. I think that's accurate. I do think there'll be new data, new analysis, new determination on what cost of production will be. That's a different issue. I think that they will, within the scope of the agreement that they've provided, give us a better sense on what the economy of scale effect is going to be moving forward. Asset transfer and valuation today is a snapshot today. The cost of production is, in my view, a larger issue, and that I do believe that they will provide to us in completion of the Phase 2 scope.
I'm just going to say the response that I got back says, as we've seen during the first phase of our work, those inputs have already been developed and are available for us to use in Phase 2. So that's where I took that to assume that there would be no new inputs.
And I appreciate that. Maybe we need to talk about what inputs are. I think the inputs that he's talking about there from cost of service would be my guess, which is more of a production cost and cost relative to unit pricing of the combined resources of the production assets of the utility, as opposed to the valuation of AC Ward versus Saylorville.
Mr. Director, if you may, Madam Chair.
Sure.
I am hopeful that maybe, if I might use just sort of a descriptive thing to deal with, am I hearing that a value of a gallon of water is a value no matter where it comes from?
As produced, yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at a swimming pool that has X amount of gallons of water in it. And then I'm looking at a stream that keeps delivering me water every single day. And so I'm taking water out of this swimming pool till I reach the bottom. and then I'm done. And I'm not sure how long it's gonna take me to get there.
Right.
But I've got a supply over here that hopefully is gonna, in a reasonable foreseeable future of 100 years, 200 years, the streams are gonna keep flowing. I don't see it, this is a personal view, how we value a poke into a pool the same as we do assets that are producing water out of a asset that hopefully will continually run, the same. Because I would assume that the pool, whether it's underground or above ground, is at some moment or another gonna be drained. And then what we have to do is go drill another hole in another place and, quite frankly, deplete the aquifer further. In which case, as we've seen in other areas of the world, on occasion, the aquifers collapse then because there's nothing under it to hold it up, and we're doing all kinds of other things at Mexico City, for instance. I'm just hopeful that as they look at assets, that they see some difference in an asset that has a finite amount where one that is perpetual, if you will.
Mayor, and I know you know that we both agree on the constraints in our philosophy of groundwater versus surface water in terms of longevity and supply and environmental impact. I think the issue relative to the snapshot that we're talking about today is whether a gallon of water today taken from the swimming pool is, to use your metaphor, the same as the stream. And for purposes of this analysis, it's treated that way. In terms of long-term planning and what the Regional Governance Board will do about how to water resource manage going forward, giving a higher preference to surface water, obviously, from Des Moines' standpoint, makes more sense than groundwater. The flip side of that is our friends in some other communities will say that the environmental risks and cost of having polluted surface water relative to a more quality, predictable groundwater source gives them an advantage. The real point I'm trying to make here is I think that that issue of groundwater versus surface water is a planning issue, not necessarily an asset valuation issue today. But I do appreciate the concerns that I share with you about long-term use of groundwater as a source for drinking water in the region.
I just for the record, I would prefer to drink the water that comes from the surface treated by the Des Moines Water Works than some that may come from some other source out of the ground. I kind of find a difference personally. I just
thank you for your loyalty there. We appreciate that.
Other discussion?
I'll say my dad famously in our family, they came back from California and he got a drink from the Des Moines tap and he said, "Oh, good old American water again." So, my concerns, I share what Graham is talking about. I think in any kind of negotiation, in my job, I'm trying to develop some kind of rapport with my clients and the prosecutors and trying to see if we can find some space in between where we can agree and then figure out where we don't agree and see what we can work on there. And what's, what people can live with and what they would really hope for if they had everything that they wanted. I think we have a lot of reasons to go forward with discussion and figuring out what we can do. I think in some part I've never abandoned the idea that we originally set out that we were not going to exchange assets or do that. I think as Diana said, we can do regionalization without exchange of assets. Certainly we all agreed that we thought that was possible at the outset. And I thought what we agreed to over the process was that we would explore whether it's possible to do exchange of assets as well, that some thought that there might be some more fairness there. So I think we need to explore both paths to see what works out best. Because I don't want us to reach a dead point because we could achieve this, but because we didn't agree to this other path, we're not even going to explore the other thing that we already have. I think there's a lot of value, and I think we all have good things. I try to go forward with integrity and saying to people what I think, what's really on my mind, so that they understand what's on my mind, and not that I've got some other thing that's on my mind that I'm not actually saying. And I always hope that other people are doing that, but it doesn't always happen. I know there are people that are still holding out, as we had last year, that we'll just come in and if you don't do what we're saying, we'll dissolve the waterworks and we'll go to a different method to get what we want. There are other communities that are talking about, well, and it's a fear that we have that other communities might do something that's uneconomic for them as well as the region, as far as building plant and it's difficult to try to make everybody do the right thing. And that's why we want to have a regional agreement. It is in our interest, and we do want that. I appreciate that Jason, and as I've talked with him about this, that he's trying to look at asset valuation in a different way to see if we can, figure out, since we weren't able to after the Black and Beach study, some way to compromise and see it in a different view, different perspective, and I think there's some value to that. But we could still reach that impasse that I talked about before. And I don't want to abandon the idea that we don't need to exchange assets to come to agreements on future production and governance and making some decisions on what we're paying for our water, so that people are on board with that. I am troubled. We went through, as the staff notes here, that there's a large there are a number of differences we have with in the MOU that we went through, and we spent some good time on that in perspective. And I think especially troubling that you can't get these assets back if it doesn't work out. We can't get an annulment and take our assets back. But other parties could for 10 years. It seemed like I would like us all to be coming at this from the same perspective and understanding of things, and it kind of troubles me that we don't have that MOU completed before we start heading off on this path again. I do think what Jason is saying we're trying to do in this next phase is explore this further. I think last August time frame, when we were looking at who we would hire as our consultant, that we had some concerns on the abilities. We had one group that had just lost somebody that really did this work, and others that so we picked somebody that we thought was good and suited for the purpose of not exchanging assets. So I think that's possible, and I think in the long run it comes down to input from our staff on what we think our value is, input from other places on what they think their value is and what they think our value is, and coming to an agreement. And the person in the middle, the mediator, so to speak, is putting out a suggestion to see if we can live with it and see if we can come to that agreement. I think that's Jason's purpose. I think they probably can, and they could probably bring on the kind of expertise they need and use Black and Beach as a basis. Jason said he thinks Black and Beach may understate our value as far as production and plant, if anything. So I really think, and I'll say again, City of Des Moines, Mayor's been accessible. I appreciate that. City manager has actually talked to me in the last year, so that's good. There have been some council people that I'm still waiting on a phone call from 14 months ago. And we've had one issue to discuss, and we haven't really discussed that. And I would like to work better on those kinds of things, communication-wise. So, there's a little up and down, and this is a big issue for the entire community, for the state of Iowa. And, everybody comes here. I hear a lot when I'm out in other places about Des Moines, and why Des Moines this, and why Des Moines that. Well, because we've got about a third of the state's population is here drinking our water all the time. So this is important for everybody. And, I don't think, I do think it's unfortunate that Diane's not here to be able to have a full board vote on this. I want to move forward. I want to continue working on regionalization. There are some issues that I want to make sure that we all understand, though, as far as the way I see things and where we're coming from. So I'm not sure that we're going to be able to achieve what we hope to, and it's unfair, I think, to have other people saying that they're going to kill us if we don't do what they tell us to. That's really not conducive to the best process, but I think we probably need to do this, and I think we can supplement. As Jason said many times, we've got an excellent staff that is on top of things and working towards the best things for the entire community, and I think we can continue doing that.
Madam Chair, can I add a data point actually that Graham suggested in one of our earlier subcommittee meetings relative to the point Mark's making about more board involvement. Staff is suggesting taking up on this on the idea that Graham offered during our last customer relations discussion, that to dovetail the planning committee meeting, which will be held next Tuesday, and move the customer relations discussion, and in the event there are continued regionalization discussions, that would provide the entire board at least the opportunity to be able to cross-attend meetings on the same day. I think Graham's suggestion was towards 3:30 for the planning committee meeting, and then have the customer relations meeting immediately after that at 4 o'clock or whatever. Provides, I think, an easier schedule for you, Mark, obviously, to be on board with a larger discussion about regionalization if that moves forward, or more accurately on any customer relations matter that comes in front of it. And if I may, in your consideration of this, I would ask to bifurcate it, if I may. I've done the math erroneously earlier before. I would like the board to take action on the staff recommendation to pay some $21,000 for the gap payment, if you will, to FCS for billings involving January and February. That's after the termination of the original agreement and before phase 2 would kick in, should you choose to approve it for essentially services that have already been provided. We will turn to Urbandale and West Des Moines for their 1/3 contribution of that. So essentially, although we're asking you to approve $21,000, we would hope to reclaim $14,000 of that. So I would ask your consideration of that preferentially before your vote on the FCS agreement phase 2.
I don't know how that works. We have one motion on the table, so I don't know how the chair wants to handle that.
Just have a friendly, whatever.
Would you withdraw your motion?
Sure.
And I will, okay. So we are looking for a motion then at this point to approve the invoices for January and February totaling just under $21,000.
I would make that motion. Second.
Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. So Mark, are there additional pieces in the financial review in this next phase that you would be more comfortable with if we talked to Jason about to see if they could be included? Is that what I'm trying to understand, what would bring you more comfort, or other members of the board?
Well, I wrote to Bill this last week just asking about that MOU and see where we are after we made our edits and went through that process. And you know, because that's an iterative process where we give our piece and then it goes off to, you know, somewhere and then comes back to us. And we see where everybody else is and if we're in agreement or not. I talked to Scott Brennan for West Des Moines. He said it was his understanding that they were going to do what we said. But it's kind of nice to have it all laid out and make sure that we've seen that together and see what the feedback is from those other communities. So I would like that. I think that's something that we need to make sure.
Can I
Kinda
query
gets
that a little
done,
bit,
so,
Mark, just for
yeah.
my benefit, because I want to try and catch the concern as best as I can. It seems to me that the scope that he's chosen here really now is, to use Graham's earlier metaphor, it's kind of to take data, some of it may be existing, some of it may not, and deal with the financials, not necessarily to step through the MOU until that data is available. I know there's been some discussion about whether they should be concurrent paths. It seems to me that the MOU completion process has bogged us down into climate change discussions and other issues. They're certainly relevant in the larger context of things, but slow down the MOU process when in fact the phase 2 scope is really about economics. And I would suggest that altering the scope of the agreement, I think at this point, could be a little problematic because then you're gonna have to go back to West Des Moines and Urbandale.
What I'm saying is that, you know, I have some, you know, we put things in writing for a reason to make sure that people see that, yeah, this is what we committed to. I haven't seen anything since we made our edits that says other communities are in agreement with what we're saying we need.
I think that's
And
accurate. That
that's,
has not happened.
that makes me uncomfortable, because if they were rejecting, you know, our edits and what we're saying we need on there, that obviously is an issue. So why are we?
And if I may, Mark,
So-
in my view, you know, kind of the negotiations world, the labor negotiations world that you and I both come from says, you know, there's no deal until the entire deal is sealed. So the idea that there's some iteration going on now, the MOU for me isn't particularly troublesome. It just seems to be kind of a time bandit now from my vantage. If we're asking for economics, the MOU, the economics either work or they don't. The MOU is going to be important to make sure that the operating agreement is an example, which is going to be very important to us, and how our employees are treated, and what the term is, and how others are treated even-handedly. I think I would focus on the scope that's been presented to you, recognizing that, you know, I don't know how Jason intends to approach it, but if, you know, we're going to go through line by line on the MOU, that probably isn't as true to
Well,
the
I'm not
scope
asking
No, I know you're not
Jason
asking that.
Yeah, I'm just saying it would be kind of nice to have some kind of official, hey, we think we can work with this, or.
I don't think we're going to get
Something
that until
I
all
know we're not
sides
gonna
get
get
the
it tonight,
economics.
but I've been kind of waiting for that prior to
Understand.
committing, so.
But, and to be responsive to the rest of the board, you and I, you'd asked the question where we are with the MOU, and I basically said, in my view, it stopped in January when
And-
Jason was.
And obviously, it said, it references here that we're gonna work on the MOU as part of this process, so that's, and I'm just pointing out that it just seems kind of a, you know, a preliminary step to see that we're in agreement on where we're headed through that MOU, you know, as we're making our goals together, making sure that we're heading in the right direction, so. And I'm not asking for anything, I'm just trying to simply point out that my comfort on that would be improved if we had gotten that done, so.
So are you interested from what you've said in moving ahead on this?
Like I said, I think we seem obligated to explore this in this way, but I don't want that to be seen as me saying, yeah, we need to exchange assets. I
Got
don't
it.
think that that's what this vote is, and I think that we still need to be committed because, you know, if people say we're dead in the water because we're not exchanging assets, that's not what we committed to in the first place. We talked about that as a, would you entertain this idea, as how it came about, suggestion as I remember it. in this room, and we've been entertaining it. But I don't think we should abandon the idea that we can do this without that, and we can come up with some agreements.
And to that point, I think all of the ideas, if there are any other ideas, this is a good time to put them on the table as we go over the next 6 months, hopefully in this phase 2 of the contract, if the board is so inclined to approve it. My biggest concern is that I want us to continue to be involved in the discussions with our regional customers. I've heard several of the mayors say, we like the idea of regionalization. We have to believe that it would be a more economical approach, but can you show us? And I think part of this study, I think, will allow an Urbandale or an Ankeny or a West Des Moines, even a Waukee, to have that assurance, to know that financially and economically this is the right way to go. In regionalization generally, not necessarily, exactly this approach, so.
And if I may, Sue, just to add, I don't think that phase 2 will necessarily solve all the problems we're talking about. I'll give you a couple that pop to mind just so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. This idea that some of our total service customers, as an example, may want to have governance. I think that is very much an open issue as to whether that makes good business sense for you. That's a political issue as well as a financial issue that I don't think you want to look to a third party to answer that question. And I also want to make clear that, in my view, whatever comes out of phase 2 will raise some tough questions for cities like Johnston, who will have no excess surplus capacity, whatever it may be, and will be facing, I believe, at least as I would see it now, significant capital contributions. Or a city like Grimes, which has been talking with Ted and others, Dan and our engineering staff, about wanting to connect in with us. They've made no capital contribution, and governance issues haven't even been broached with them. So there are a lot of moving issues out there. In my view, all the answers to complex issues that you as trustees are going to face aren't going to be answered by phase 2, but I believe it will move you closer to a decision as to whether there's a business case for Des Moines ratepayers and continuing to have the discussion. If you stop it now for whatever reason, you certainly have the ability to do that, but I think there'll be questions of good faith, whether we operate in good faith. Yeah, I do appreciate the extortion from the legislature shouldn't be the motivating factor for where you're coming from. But it seems to me that the economics of whether asset transfer can work are pretty abstract right now, and I know that all of you have some reservation about that, but I don't think you have enough information to be able to answer the question.
I will say too, as far as our process goes, and that is part of my concern, is I want to make sure, we formed our customer relations committee not to deal with my monthly bill or anything like that, but to deal with the other communities and the real big questions, and regionalization is at the center of it as far as I understand. And I want to make sure we've got the people who are on that committee are all part of this, that everybody's informed about what's going on, going back and forth. I think that it is kind of more planning related than others, because especially when we're talking about asset, we talk about cleaning our wells at the planning committee, but if we're talking about asset transfer, it goes much bigger than what we're doing with a couple of wells or other things, and it really gets into what we retain and what we don't retain and some of that. So I think having it in conjunction with our planning meetings, so we can piggyback and exchange information there, I think would be good. And that's maybe less germane to this particular discussion, but it comes up, so.
And as part of that, it may be easier too for all or many of you to be involved going forward, because there would be only one formal meeting a month. The other information they'll be gathering from the communities, so it may not be as much of a time commitment as we were previously asking with 2 evening meetings twice, every other week. So So with that, we have made a change to the yellow, Michelle, I believe, and so the fiscal impact would be adjusted, but I will be looking for a motion then to approve and authorize CEO and general manager to execute the consulting agreement with FCS Group for the regional water production phase 2.
So
Is there a second?
I thought we were just gonna go back to where we were with you.
Second.
I'm comfortable with that.
So to be clear, because it's been said a couple of times here, what we're voting on is on a contract to continue hiring FCS Group to follow this phase 2 as they've laid out. This isn't a vote to whether we're going to continue or discontinue discussions with the others in the region. Am I correct?
that's true.
Because you said otherwise. And I just want to be clear so that those listening understand what we're voting on.
Fair enough, Graham. My view is that a decision to reject phase 2 will send a signal to some of the other customers, some of the other communities that negotiations have broken down. That's my interpretation. You can disagree with that.
Right.
The narrow issue in front of you is in fact whether you will approve a $200,000 payment apportioned among the parties for phase 2 agreement with FCS in the scope that's identified within the materials you have.
And that's an important point that I want to make here, because I feel, I think as much as anybody at this table, that it's very important that we continue to explore every avenue for regional cooperation that we can. And even to the point that I think I have stated pretty clearly that I have reservations about this asset transfer model, but I continue to say that it's important, because it seems so important to others around the table in the regional discussions to explore this, that we should explore it fully. And so my reservations about the FCS Group's phase 2 contract is not, should not be seen as a reservation about whether we should or shouldn't pursue asset transfer as an option. I think we should. Unfortunately, we're at, I guess I am in a situation where we must now either approve or reject this contract. I think there's a possibility that this contract could be improved from where it is, and I'll tell you why. My real concern is that between now and August, we're not going to make any substantive steps toward drafting an agreement involving asset transfer, and that we're going to spend a lot of time between now and August. I think the way that it was put in the FCS document is making the economic case for regionalization. I think all of the entities at the table are capable of determining the economic case for regionalization. I might argue, I guess it's my opinion, that some of those entities around the table that are pursuing or have pursued building their own plants, this isn't about economics for them. It's about political control for them. So spending the next 8 months or so making a case for economic benefits to each of the communities, I think is going to fall on deaf ears, because I don't think that's their motivating factor. I think what the parties around the table are interested in is, if we do this asset transfer model, what will it look like? How will it be governed? I would much prefer to see a phase 2 that says, over the next few months, we're going to develop, I think Mark was pointing to this in his comment, how this agreement's going to look. But that's not what the FCS phase 2 contract says. It's going to make an economic case for this. You know, if a person hires a real estate agent to sell his home, he doesn't hire the real estate agent to make an economic case of whether he's going to sell it and whether the buyer should buy it. He wants the house sold. If this entity engages its staff and its legal team to do collective bargaining with employees, we don't hire them to make an economic case for why people should work here. We want an agreement at the end of the day. I could say the same about hiring our legal counsel to pursue the case against the counties northwest due to pollution. We didn't hire him to make the case. We actually hired him to take the case to court and come to a result. This document, this phase, does not promise us any type of result, and I fear that it's not going to get us any closer to where we need to be at the end of the day. And so to go back to where we started with the mayor's comments on this, my big fear is that if we follow this proposal as it's laid out, we're actually setting ourselves up for failure. Because what we're saying is we're not going to solve these. We're going to have more questions at the end of by August than we have today. We're not going to have an agreement. We're not going to have the MOU done. We're not going to have a 28E or F drafted. We're just going to spend more time being frustrated with each other, talking about the things that we've talked about for the next 6 months. I would like, instead of passing this today, to go back to FCS and possibly another entity if FCS is incapable of doing this, and creating a phase 2 that actually moves the ball down the field. This one doesn't. And let me just say, that's not me saying, I want to be clear because I started with this. It's not me saying we should stop negotiations. I'm saying the very opposite. We should get into serious negotiation with serious goals and where everybody understands where we're going to be at the end of the day. And that may be to say we can't come to an agreement or even draft an agreement on asset transfer, so therefore we're going to look at something else.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's, it does get to another aspect of what I'm talking about procedurally, and I think it's, we're given a document that each of us independently can either accept or not, and if we don't get together to talk about maybe this isn't the document we need from the consultant. And I do fear that if we don't go about doing it that way, that these other entities will just say, they'll take it as a rejection of the process and go do their own thing.
Right.
Or legislatively take other action. Despite that, despite the fact that, so many of things, so much of what happened last year made no sense from a practical standpoint or real world, what's going to be best for all the 600,000 people in this area. But this we can do it anyway, and that's part of the crux of what I think is that at least we'll be in August. That's the one thing that I look at is that it's like a bridge.
Grant, I don't see that there would be anything wrong with us as a board starting to have the discussions, and if that's looking at the MOU or another phase. I've heard from the other entities numerous times, what does Des Moines Waterworks want? So we can certainly, as this phase would be going on, where we're justifying regionalization, be looking at what we think we're all going to want. And maybe another idea comes out as a result. I don't think we have to just be doing one thing. If there is another great idea out there and this information will help us support that, great.
But see, my problem with this phase is that we're still justifying the case for regionalization.
Yeah.
I think we're past that, and I think we should agree that regionalization has merits. And now let's discuss how do we regionalize. And that's a different approach than what's laid out in FCS.
I don't think we are past justifying regionalization. I don't think we are. I don't think I'm not trying to speak for West Des Moines, but how does West Des Moines know that if they join this regional entity, that the water that they would be purchasing would be at a more economical rate than what they are producing it. Because if I sat on the West Des Moines board, that's what I'd want to know. Or Urbandale, how does Urbandale know?
And I'm looking at it from a slight edit to that, making the economic case for regionalization from an asset transfer standpoint. That's what I see in here.
That's an interesting point.
Because we already, I do think we're committed, we do see that economic value to regionalization, and that's what that's where I'm looking at this, is that it all seems to be about heading towards asset transfer, because I think that's the big economic exploration, because the other parts of it were, can we, and if there's, that seemed to be the bigger crux of that question that maybe was unstated, but it seemed to be the push within it.
If I may just add a couple points that hopefully are somewhat responsive to the reservations both of you have, and I hear them, I think, pretty clearly. One of them is, there's a change order process opportunity always in a contract, meaning if there is a particular issue, whether it's the operating agreement, which for me as an operating person is extraordinarily important to all this, you can figure out the economics, you can figure out the governance, but if there are problems in how this works operationally, it creates concerns and costs eventually. My point is that I think there are opportunities within the agreement to change order it, to chase issues that are important to us and may not be important to pick at Urbandale. But there's a larger issue that I think we all kind of agree on, and that is that there is a heavy emphasis here on exhausting the asset transfer option. It may or may not work. I mean, I don't think we have a sense of that, but it's clearly the path that this is taken, and that has, I think there's a level of reservation in all of you in that. But from my vantage and being at all of the discussions that have been held, at least publicly, on this, there are some suburban communities that hope that there is an economic basis for economies of scale, but are willing to take an economic step backwards for governance reasons. And they have a different calculus than you do, and they're not all monolithic. But West Des Moines, Steve has been very clear that he wants to be able to control his destiny, and that means not only economics, but that means governance. And you don't have to accept that calculus, but right now I think getting a sense of what's in it for Des Moines ratepayers to stay in this process is a pretty important question to answer, and I don't think you can answer it until at least the lion's share of phase 2 is completed.
Bill, to speak further on that, I think,
Sure.
I'm going to go back again. I don't know that it is clear to everybody that we have an economic case for regionalization. Or otherwise, I don't think some of the other communities might be exploring some of the things that they're looking at that as I refer to them as non-economic.
Well, that's what I said. I think some of
Yeah.
these communities, the economic case does not matter.
Yeah, and so there may be some value to us in just showing. A friend of mine one time told me that when he does, his tort actions, that he puts a book together. Here are the facts. Here's the economics and what we have, and then I take it and so that we can look at it together. It's like when in a divorce case, when they do the financial matrix, they have it in a Supreme Court approved document so that they make sure everything's there and both sides have to do the same apples to apples, and that there may be some advantage in that as well on the other issue. Just to know, really, we are all in this together. There is some economic value, and the governance, here's where we trade off and why. So, for that,
See,
and I understand where you're coming from,
right,
exactly.
Here's my concern, because
And that's what I'm saying. Some of the stuff has got nothing to do with making a good, rational decision at all.
Right. But you say, okay, look at this like, this is making an economic case for
Right.
Asset transfer. And Bill, you said, we're going to exhaust the asset transfer model in this phase 2. And my concern is, it doesn't say that we're going to make an economic case for asset transfer. It says we're going to make an economic case for regionalization. It doesn't say we're going to exhaust asset transfer because the end result is not creating an agreement or a model for asset transfer.
That's perfect.
I think this phase would be much more helpful to this region if it said in clear terms, the goal for phase 2 is to create a model under asset transfer so that if you're Urbandale, and I'm putting words in Urbandale's mouth, but I'm going to do it. If you're Urbandale and you're not interested in the economic model, you're interested in the governance model, you're going to see that at the end of this phase 2. If you're Des Moines Waterworks and you're interested in the economic phase, you're going to see that in phase 2. Unfortunately, what's been proposed by FCS doesn't do that. It's all in this clouds where Mark can interpret one thing and West Des Moines can interpret something else, and we can all interpret it. And that's my great fear, because everybody's going to come into phase 2 with different expectations, and we're going to get to August and be very frustrated as a region that we haven't done anything. And so our urgency today to pass this agreement, or the wheels are going to fall off the cart, is actually setting us up for disaster. When what we should say, this contract that's been proposed to us doesn't get us where we want to go, and ask FCS to come back to us with a better proposal that gets us to where we want to go.
I'd just add one dimension to it. There's been some discussion here that indicates that the suburbs are irrational and Des Moines is rational.
Well, of course, I'm always the rational one.
Just kidding.
And I agree, I don't want to say that.
I think the real point is each community is sovereign, each community is going to make its own decisions.
And each community has a different
balance between
criteria
governance and
Absolutely.
economics. I think this helps to flesh out those decision rules for individual communities. Graham, you have, I think, very prophetically said months ago that some communities will be in this at the end and some won't. It's going to be all or nothing. I just introduced that because I think it would be very difficult for Jason to come in here and come up with a scope different than what you're seeing here today that will get to the issue of individual communities' balance between governance and economics. Frankly, you have, in my view, you collectively have some irrationality in the governance versus economics issue.
Absolutely.
There is, at some level, a trade-off of your governance monopoly for keeping business. And ultimately, I know you all understand that, are going to factor it in.
Are you suggesting we don't all share a clear shared vision?
I
But
am
this-
suggesting that, Mark.
This is, and I agree with that, Will, that you raise a very good point there. This is why I think it would be so much more effective for us to say, in this phase, we're going to create a model so that everyone around the table can make those evaluations. By saying that during phase 2, we're going to make an economic case that may or may not matter to you, or may or not matter, we're spinning our wheels, or potentially partially spinning our wheels for the next few months. And if FCS Group isn't capable of coming back with a plan that gets us there, let's look at somebody else. And let's involve everybody around the work group table to do that. Right now, it's my understanding, 3 people have driven this negotiation with FCS, and, so let's open it up and involve the work group, and where do we want to go?
You're actually kind of selling me on the idea of spinning our wheels for a while on the economic part.
I'm not trying to sell anybody on spinning wheels.
So that we can get to the heart of the matter for some of the others. And I think, in August, people were worried that we already had something laid out and it was going to happen by November. And, that's not what happened. And we don't have it certainly clear, here's the deal, and it's already been struck. And I think it's going to take longer than that, and we discussed that. And then last year, we discussed we've been working towards this in a slow incremental process because that's what it takes, because we can't really ease all the parts together. Some people can do a Rubik's Cube in 60 seconds. Other people, most people, and especially when you want to focus on different things. So I think it is a longer process, and I think there are some things that we need to, like I've talked with Danny. I think one of the big values that Danny has is making people look at things and going through the complete process, even if they don't see the value at the point. I suffered through like 6 extra months of having Beaver Avenue torn up that, if people had done the right thing in the first place, it would have been a lot quicker. And it's those kinds of things that I think and I understand exactly what you're saying. And we're going to put some more money on it. I think that we're heading in a direction, and we have to discuss it. And I do think we have to spend time on it, despite the fact that it may not lead anywhere, just so that people are satisfied that it's not leading in some of those directions.
May I add a couple dimensions based on what both of you have said? First, modeling. Modeling requires some basic assumptions about elements of the model. I frankly don't think that whether it's this group or a larger group, there is enough clarity on some of the basic assumptions. I think modeling, to use your metaphor, Graham, would be a challenge here in phase 2. The second piece that I feel an obligation to disclose to the board is the long-range plan. Right there indicates the need to provide more water by 2020, and then at a 5-year increment after that. When we talk about spinning the wheels, that certainly can have negotiations benefit and provide clarity perhaps and have the legislature out of town, but our ability to be able to plan and respond to what our long-range plan already indicates needs to happen by 2020 has been impacted negatively by the last year of discussions. We continue to push that out, the impacts become more severe and compound on themselves. So for what it's worth, I understand the complexity, I understand the negotiations need to sometimes hit pause, but it will begin to have consequences, not just in the governance and economics issues, but our ability to fulfill our contractual requirements.
So this is where I'm confused, Bill, because that's my very concern, is that the phase 2 that's been proposed doesn't move the ball down the field.
I do.
And that there's a better way and a more efficient way to get to an answer, and that's by exploring in depth the asset transfer model, coming up with an agreement for people to evaluate. Phase 2 doesn't get us there, and so that's why I'm a little baffled why the staff would recommend that we do this instead of coming up with a better way and a more efficient way to get you the answers that you need.
And I think we just disagree as to whether phase 2 gets us closer to the answers necessary to make that happen, Graham. I don't know of an alternative that's realistic, that goes to modeling, that goes to saying, well, maybe asset transfer needs to go back to the original premise where we're not going to do asset transfer. I think that the center of gravity among the larger group has certainly taken us toward, right or wrong, exhausting the asset transfer alternative. If that is interrupted, I believe that it threatens.
Yeah, but let's exhaust it. Let's exhaust it. Let's do that in this phase.
Again, I think you and I disagree as to whether phase 2 gets us closer. Exhausting, I don't think you're going to come up with a scope that will exhaust all of the asset transfer issues in phase 2, because we just haven't turfed up enough of the different parties' views on valuation or future issues relative to growth at this point. I don't think you're going to negotiate that by going back and rescoping phase 2. I don't think you're going to have all.
So that's phase 3?
In my view, as I've said before, I think there are a number of open issues that will be left after phase 2. I think that is true no matter how you scope it right now, whether it's scoped in the way that is presented by FCS and supported by staff, or whether it's renegotiated.
So tell me, where are we at the end of phase 2 if we adopt this proposal today?
In
What
my
happens?
view, you've got a sense for a number of other communities other than your own about whether economies of scale as applied to them individually make sense from a regional water production standpoint.
And
Well,
if
that's-
economies of scale are not important to them, where are we with them?
I think they fall out of the issue.
So they've stopped negotiating with us?
Again, I don't presume to talk on their behalf, but each of those communities, with a couple exceptions, have an existing agreement with us. The status quo prevails. They're either a total service customer, or they continue to be a wholesale customer, and whether they decide to be a wholesale customer that supplements by building another plant or being another partner, our existing agreements don't prevent them from doing that. That's why.
I don't want to put words in your
No,
mouth, I just want to
please.
understand. So we get through phase 2, and at that point, people have made up their minds whether they're going to continue negotiations about regionalization or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily comfortable saying yes or no to that kind of question, because I don't have a perfect crystal ball about what happens at the end of phase 2. I think we'll be a lot closer to a number of communities say this does or does not make sense to us, to me as an individual community. Will it have clarity for all of the 20 communities or so that we're really kind of discussing either directly or indirectly? I don't think it will have that clarity.
Okay, and I don't want to take Dave's.
Bill, I asked you earlier today how easy this is to change. This, as it proceeds, is it kind of up to us, or does West Des Moines and Urbandale, or will they kind of go along if we want to change the scope of this?
I can't talk on behalf of West Des Moines and Urbandale, other than to say if there's a change order out there, you want to change.
It's 3-3.
Well, they certainly can enter into the change order, or depending on how Jason views the ethics, if you will, and Graham does this for a living, so he can probably answer the question better than me, whether Jason would enter into a change order only with Des Moines Water Works to pursue a particular data point.
Yeah, I realize it at the end. That is hard to say. You know, if as we get going, how hard is it to change the scope?
It'll just cost us more money.
It'll cost him more money and may raise ethical issues, because if West Des Moines really doesn't have an interest in us,
That's a good point. Thank
pursuing
you.
a particular issue, that Jason may say, I have a contract with 3 of you, I'm not going to do something for one that somebody else opposes. I mean, that, again, I think it's more in your bailiwick.
Did our staff write this, or was it?
Our staff definitely
No.
did not write this.
All three, Urbandale, West Des Moines.
No, it's
Had you-
written by FCS and then
Well, they
given
just-
to us for a scope review. And there were several changes. I think that's when we came back with some edits, but
But the parties to the agreement are Des Moines, West Des Moines, Urbandale, and FCS Group.
The water boards in each of those.
I just wondered how,
Right.
it's probably fairly hard to.
That's what I'm saying. It came from FCS, and it's kind of, each of us individually is looking at it for approval. But we didn't really discuss together, so
That's
kind
right.
of.
Once we vote on this, is it gonna,
from what I understand from talking to Jody Smith at West Des Moines, once we take action on this, and if it passes, his board has already reviewed it, and then they will take action. So,
And to my knowledge, we
waiting
haven't had a
for us.
similar discussion, at least I haven't had one with Urbandale,
John's been
I'm
out of
not sure where they are, but West Des Moines is simply waiting for you to pass it, realistically, the way they're scheduled. But they don't anticipate in my discussions with West Des Moines Water Board concerns.
Are we ready to vote?
I'll just say, just to restate, I have, a strong interest in continuing to have discussions about regional governance and regional cooperation. This contract with FCS Group is going to cause more problems than it's going to create solutions. I have a great concern that come August, we will have expended so much time and be in a difficult situation with the others in the region that this negotiation is going to fall apart. There is a better way to do this, and that is one that fully explores asset transfer as a model with the idea that we would create that model by the end of this phase, so that each entity around the table could evaluate its interest in that. This proposal that's in front of us doesn't do that and will cause more problems than it will create solutions.
We should schedule that agenda item so I can tell you you were right or not at that time.
Okay.
I would love to be wrong.
Are
I
we ready for a
understand.
vote?
Yes.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And I very much appreciate the board's interest in this and support and passion on regionalization, and I see that from every person.
And if I may,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, thanks to the mayor for being here. I know we've made you late for your next meeting. You're certainly welcome to continue to be late and stick around, but thank you.
Part of it here, I'm going to go to the Parks Board meeting.
Would you tell them I won't be making it? We're just starting our
Thank you.
agenda now.
Tell me you won't make it.
Okay, action
Thank you.
item.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Action
Let's
item
keep working.
3A. Bill, 3A.
3A, and this is one Mark and David have seen actually some video on and some discussion at the planning committee level. You know that we often, not often enough, Dan will remind me, go through a process of rehabbing our existing alluvial aquifer wells. You approved about $400,000 for well rehab at Saylorville on our 2 wells. This is acceptance of the contract, slightly less than originally agreed upon based on quantities. But for your information, I would point you to the level of increase in productivity from these wells after cleaning 100% on one and 71% on another is a reminder to us, staff, that we need to program more frequent cleanings in the future. These are about $200,000 at rehab, as you'll note by doing the math here. We will be working that more often into the operating budget moving forward for our plants with alluvial aquifer wells, that is both Saylorville and Maffett Treatment Facility. But I'd ask your approval of the payment of the acceptance of about $182,000.
So I'm looking for a motion to accept the 2017 well rehabilitation Saylorville water treatment plant contract completed by Crafts in the amount of $381,464.
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion?
Yeah, Bill, you know, if we put the same thing up at Euclid Avenue, how often is this gonna go, and how does it?
And just to remind the board, what David's talking about is we have an agreement with the United States Geological Services to look at the feasibility of alluvial aquifer wells near the Des Moines River pumping station that would populate the Fluor plant with additional source water. Dave's question is how often. Realistically, there's a lot of geology there that we don't know, but I think probably realistically, Michael, and you can weigh in on the cycle, but every 3 years probably for each well is kind of our experience.
And you think the lifetime of the wells would be, if you were guessing?
With the lifetime
with the cleaning,
with the kind of rehab that we're talking about here, the life of the wells is 40 years. Give me a number, guys. I mean,
50, I would say.
okay, we've got a range of 40 to 50 years.
So our little waterworks is outlasted what these will.
Yes.
You ready for a vote? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 3B.
B and C are both projects that I think conceptually you've seen a lot of times. I'm going to distinguish between the two of them here just for purposes of the detail for B and C, but often the city will be involved in projects, whether it's a road project or whether it's a sewer project, for the WRA from a regional standpoint where they are relocating their facilities. We, because we share a right-of-way, have to relocate our facilities. And the first one here involves the regional issue of the WRA around Union Park, as I recall. Yes, around Union Park, as I recall, the larger project is a multi-million-dollar project with the city. Our version of the relocation for our facilities under our agreement with the WRA and with the city is about $221,000. The next one you're going to see in in C is actually with the city, not with the WRA, involving combined facilities, separation of facilities in kind of the same general area. So we would ask your agreement for approving and authorizing the chair to execute a 2080 with the city of Des Moines for the $221,000 for this WRA project. I'm sorry, Dan.
The
You had a concern?
agreement is with WRA.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm foreshadowing. The next one is with the city, different, same
Sorry.
basic process, but the end owner changes a little bit. if
I
you will.
misunderstood.
No, I
So I'm-
probably didn't put it very eloquently, but this is a regional sewage, as in sanitary sewer related project. The next one actually is city, but it's a similar relocation with the city now instead of the regional WRA.
So on 3B, we're looking for a motion to approve and authorize chairperson to execute the 2080 agreement between Des Moines Metropolitan Wastewater Reclamation Authority, the Board of Waterworks Trustees of the City of Des Moines, and WRA East Side Interceptor Phase 27, Segment 5. We have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And now we're at 3C.
The next request is a similar issue, although we're requesting your authorization instead of entering into a 2080. This would be across the river from what we just talked about in Union Park. In the older portions of the city in particular, there are still combined sewer systems that mix rainwater with sanitary sewage that has obvious consequences on flooding and environmental concerns. The city is moving forward with a separation project that involves, among other things, relocating water mains. This is about $150,000, and a similar kind of decision rule, if you will, on what's our responsibility versus theirs. But this is to reimburse them for the relocation of a portion of our mains in the area of about $150,000.
Okay, so we're looking for a motion to authorize staff to reimburse the City of Des Moines for water main relocations for River Bend and King Irving Sewer Separation Phase 1. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second?
Discussion?
Yeah, Bill, I remember when this first started, and it was like 100 years ago, and there was some
The separation.
engineer, and he was passing this rainwater assessment, and it was a 10-year project. And we've renewed the tax. How many years do you think it's going to take Des Moines?
You know, I was involved in the consent decree with the city, and the mayor appropriately is no longer here because he was intimately involved in it too. I believe that our remaining time frame is an additional 15 years now, Dave. So we have another 15 years in the future to do a number of these.
You think it'll get done in 15?
I certainly hope so, because the US EPA will be pretty disappointed in us if that doesn't happen in 15 years.
Okay. That'll make a total of what, about 30?
25 or 30,
25.
yeah.
Okay.
I think that's correct.
Well, that's not bad for,
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
uh-huh, yeah, I know.
Any other discussion on 3C? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And item 3D.
3D, you have taken action on.
3E.
If I may, on 3F, I think I'm sorry.
3E.
3E, sorry, thanks, Graham. I think you will recall that although we've had a pretty mild winter, Ted and his crews were really burdened from mid-December probably through January with a number of main breaks. 180 temporary pavement patches out there dealing with those. We've had discussions with our union about this volume, and staff's recommendation to contract out the replacement of temporary with permanent pavement involving each of those main breaks actually came to you, I believe, with permission permission to bid a month ago, maybe, on this, or we did not ask for permission, sorry. We went to the bidding market and received pricing on 104 of these. That'll be done turnkey, basically, by contractor. Great pricing. This is, as you can do the math, $2,000 or so, a little bit over that per patch. And again, our staff simply would be unable to do it within the schedule here of doing their normal work, plus this unusual bubble of repairing or replacing the temporary patches between now and the middle of August. So staff recommendation here is for approval of about $226,000 to Q3 contract, who's done this work for us before.
Significantly below the engineering estimate, too.
It is.
Nice. Right. So we're looking for a motion to approve the 2018 pavement restoration contract to Q3 Contracting, Inc. in the amount of $225,562.35 and authorize the chairperson, CEO, and general manager to execute the contract. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we have item 3F.
3F is a little bit of an unusual one. Let me spend a couple minutes talking to you about it. The map that you have is a good job. I know Mark is very familiar with this particular area and the issue that's in front of you. This is near the intersection of 38th and Easton. We have a number of homes on East 38th that are now served by a 1-inch main. Dan and Ted remind me that gratefully, this is the only 1-inch main that is publicly owned in the city. That's way too undersized for circumstances. We have a new house that a owner is looking at constructing on this street. So it is incumbent, in our view, that this main be upgraded, and we will be asking for a partial contribution from the new home that will need to connect on it. But otherwise, this is money, roughly $140,000 as it balances out. That'll come out of the water main replacement dollars for 2018 in Des Moines. You'll note that pricing comes from a contract that we had in 2017 in Polk County. That's a little odd, but the pricing is obviously 2017 pricing in 2018 is very beneficial. That's how our engineering staff under Dan's leadership came up with the metric here. Happy to answer any questions you may have on it, but essentially the staff recommendation here is to change order $153,000 to J&K contract based on pricing for from 2017 to replace this 1-inch main on East 38th here in Des Moines.
So I'm looking for a motion to authorize the CEO and general manager to execute the change order number 5, the 2017 Polk County Water System Improvements, Contract 1. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second, any other discussion?
I will say I had the contractor who's working on this house and owns the property come to me directly, because I know him outside, and asked me to look at it, and I said I will go to staff and I will ask them what's going on here, just so that, you know, I'm clear, and that make sure that, you know, we don't have any tangled lines. And then we uncovered that we've got a 1-inch water main on this street, and it's a block from my kindergarten school, and I know this area. It's between my sister's house and my house, and we drive through there all the time for a variety of reasons. But he's, you know, I think what we've tried to be, and I think it fits, and I left it at that. I said my only commitment was I'll ask staff to take a look at it and see if there's, how it fits within everything else we're doing, and they did. And I think everything that we try to do is to try to make it so that when somebody wants to hook up to our water, that they have a foreseeable cost, and we try to describe so that there are no surprises or hiccups, or you know, it's here, it costs this much in this part of town or somewhere else. And so somehow in the 60s somebody made a decision that nobody would have expected, I think. And so I appreciate staff looking at that, and a solution, so.
Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Moving into informational items, planning committee.
I think we've talked about everything.
The last planning item that I think you and Mark were privy to, Dave, involved some discussion about the 30th Street property across the way here where we had a tenant that essentially was terminated from our agreement at its expiration at the end of last year. We put out an RFP that is not due yet, but if you go by the little area just to our north here on 30th and Light Parkway, you'll see Ted and his crews have removed a number of trees. We've cleaned it up. We have a number of interested parties. You know, you may remember that what you charge for that 10 acres is about $700 a year. It's essentially nothing. But Ted and his staff have constructed the RFP in a way that has them indicating, each of the respondents indicating what they would bring to a larger community. I know we have, as an example, a cricket respondent, as well as a number of softball respondents and football respondents. So staff will work that through, but that's what was discussed.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to do it rather than just money.
Certainly, it costs you more to rent it than the $700, I promise you.
And then we had finance and audit combined with customer relations.
And I don't want to, customer relations, I think we pretty much handled that because that was the FCS. And I don't want to mangle the finance and audit committee, and I don't know if Peggy wants to comment or you do, Phil. I think there's great work going on here, and I don't want to misinterpret that.
Happy to talk a little bit about the cost of service. You'll remember that you approved as a board about $200,000 is my recollection for Raftellus to come in and look at our existing cost of service study. As part of that process, they're going to be making a number of recommendations and coming back to you as a board. Some of the recommendations involve looking at our capital needs and more forward loading that into rates as opposed to this odd situation that normally would occur this fall where in 2018 you're looking at 2017 cost of service to determine rates for 2019. It will be more forward looking, but that's essentially where they are, Peggy. Is there anything that I missed there for the board?
I mean, this is a study long overdue, right, Dave? I mean, this is something that, I have high hopes for, and I think that, Peggy gave us a lot of confidence that things are moving forward in that way.
And if I may, and I think this is probably the right forum to introduce it, but in our discussion with the consultants who've come in to look at our cost of service, certainly they've been, I think, largely supportive of our cost of service methodology. They have suggested in the future that it would be possible to look at wholesale customers a little bit differently instead of one box that includes all of our wholesale customers from a cost of service standpoint together. There may be an opportunity to segment out a customer that peaks off of us and does not take all of their water needs from us, like West Des Moines, and view that as a higher cost of service than other wholesale customers. So I mention that to you because it may have some implications on discussions forward involving regionalization and the economics of regionalization relative to West Des Moines versus Urbandale as an example. But thanks for the opportunity.
Yep. And there's all that, as I said, customer relations we talked about, so.
Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden, we had a presentation at the last board meeting. Anything new on that, Peggy? No? Okay.
The only thing that I will re-extend my offer to represent the board, should there be one.
I was just going to say, that would, Graham, put you in charge of 3 boards or 3 committees, so.
It's all about a power plant.
I know we were waiting.
Thanks for getting that, Graham.
Because service on the Greater Des Moines Botanical Garden is all about power.
It is.
It's about time commitment too, and I know Diane
I
expressed
love that
an
place, and
interest.
it's a great thing for the community.
Diane expressed an interest in doing something, so I'd ask you
If
if you
she's-
want to step away. No, I'm saying if you want to step away from anything else, give that some thought, because that would put you chairing 3 of our
No,
committees.
and as I say, the Greater Botanical Garden Board is more of a terrific effort, and I just stepped away from another commitment on that front. That's why I'm willing to do it. And it's a great thing on the NSCAP committee.
So with your direction,
Yes.
Madam Chair, staff will move forward to prepare the resolution necessary to support
That'd
that
be terrific.
action on behalf of the full board's approval relative to your nomination. We'll have that ready for you in
Great.
April, so we'll work on that.
When-
Michelle and I.
And at a presentation last month, they didn't tell me that my friend was planning on leaving and starting his own landscaping firm, so now he came out today to my yard to look, and so my wife's asking if it will look exactly like the botanical gardens, so. I said,
And
sure.
then Des Moines Waterworks Park Foundation Board, anything, Mark or Dave, to update?
If there's anything new.
I don't think there's anything big to update, other than I was kind of hoping to hear if we learned anything about 2080 agreements, and I don't think we're there yet. I think there was a presentation with the park board.
Foundation, the park board, excuse me, as in the City of Des Moines Park Board that the mayor was actually going to. That's where it was
So
next
there's a
designated.
presentation tonight, and we're moving forward with that. I talked to little Charlotte Hubble on Saturday about where we are and trying to make sure that comes together. I think people are excited about that. We obviously, I think just between our planning meeting and that, there was a lot of discussion of trees, and I've heard a little bit more about trees. I think the feedback, once people understand what's going on and where we are, becomes a little bit better, but, so.
If I may add one additional point here, and I think I've had just a brief discussion with Mark and David on this. Sam Carroll and Kate Bias has had discussion with staff about this board's receptivity to adding a checkoff capability in the future to your water bill. If you're a Des Moines resident, would you allow X number of dollars per month to be added to your bill and then directed to the Parks Foundation? Staff is of the mind that, clearly ultimately that is going to be your decision as a board. We're frankly not in a position to even recommend it to you until probably early next year because of the customer information system process that we're working through now. It may sound easy to add a check off, but it's not in terms of billing and to work through how you take priority of billing in the event of shut off. If I pay my entire water bill but for my check off amount, there were a number of questions there about how that should be handled both legally and in terms of accounting. So I just wanted you as a board to know that that is an idea that's floating out there. At this point, frankly, the staff is pretty agnostic on the issue, other than to tell you that, in our view, doing it this calendar year would be a complete misfire. But certainly your individual views on this one as we move forward would be pretty important.
Yeah, and all right. I mean, I think there's a number of concerns there that
There
I think a lot of us would have, expenditures to get it done.
Yes.
Staff time.
Yes.
Ongoing, how we would handle that money. We don't want to be in the business of handling the foundation's funds.
Understood.
All those maybe can be done, but I get your concern, and I agree.
Yeah,
And I think there's a practical issue too about who you would allow it for and who you won't.
Yeah,
Obviously,
exactly.
our relationship with the foundation is far closer than any
Absolutely.
other relationship I can think of. But nonetheless, there'll be others, City of Des Moines Parks may make that request as an example, right
Fleur
across from
Drive,
Grays Lake and
plants.
Fleur Drive, yeah. So there are a number of policy issues, but we're so far away, frankly, from the staff being able to support that idea that I just want you to be aware of the concepts out there.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that Loyola University Chicago, where I went to law school, is in the Final Four. So.
Are you expecting a check off for them next year?
Just want people to be aware, so it's good.
Legislative update, anything, Bill, that?
Laura is training in St. Paul today, but I believe you have seen our lobbyist report concerning legislative activities, some recent developments about the bottle bill that seem to indicate that probably the status quo will persist going forward as it relates to the legislation we're directly involved in. Fortunately, the legislature has been relatively silent, but again, my apologies.
CEO and General Manager comments?
Mark, I'm sorry.
Oh,
No, just talking about the bottle bill, as it relates to, we have great water coming out of everyone's tap that costs far less than getting water from bottles.
Far less.
And yet, those same bottles, there's no deposit on those. And oftentimes, those are the same bottles that we're not catching in our stream, so.
And on your behalf, we've been supportive of legislation that would expand the bottle bill rather than eliminate it, obviously. So staff, with our lobbyists, certainly understand that issue. I just have a couple remarks, if I may make it under my comments. I actually one now, since I mentioned the check off. The other is the city of Grimes has contacted us through Mark Aronson, who's their interim or contract city administrator, about an emergency connection. As I understand it, they were concerned about their ability to provide water last year, in the summer of last year during peak demand. I and the staff have communicated back to them and will communicate greater detail, but essentially the idea of an emergency connection is not an issue that staff is recommending. We believe that there should be a minimum purchase associated with any connection to our system from here going forward, rather than simply holding us as required to provide, or at least the expectation that we'll provide some amount of water when essentially we may get nothing out of it. Altoona, as you may be reminded, has a similar emergency connection which they've had to use this year, but it provides really no planning horizon for us to expect base load demand. The long and short of it is, I want you to be aware that that discussion is out there. There's no bleed over, at least from staff's perspective, into governance issues and where that would take them. We are in the process of coming up with a communication back to them that talks about minimum purchase, but also talks about capital contribution. Obviously, there's no capacity to sell to them at this point, but allowing them to simply connect and take a whiz storage rate, as an example, would not be respectful of the absence of investment, capital investment that they've made in the system relative to other facilities, or relative to other existing customers. So all of which is to say, the discussions are going on. They're pretty complicated. It will be at a high price tag for Grimes to have a connection to us, and the price tag will involve a capital contribution as well as a requirement to take a minimum amount of our water. I think we were looking at 720,000 gallons, more or less, about half their demand on a daily basis. The economics, frankly, may not work for them, but I did want you to know the context of not only business but other issues involving regionalization that discussion's going on.
Bill, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Because I've heard some things, and I want to make sure the whole board knows before the board starts to receive phone calls, because I think some of you will. With the Hubble Gray Station development that's going on, I know that they are on kind of a fast track to get going on this, and I came from a meeting earlier today where they're actually moving the connection to Grays Lake up here. The bridge is being moved up June 18. And I remember last fall you saying that they came to some of our staff, and then I believe also to you, about density. I had a follow-up conversation with Rita Connors from their economic development area last fall, and she made a statement that all of the density in the city of Des Moines is changing, and that we would need to change too. And my comment to her was, our staff recommendation that I had heard about this was not to do that. So would you mind, because I do think
Summarizing
this is
kind
a
of where
very high visible area that I think people are going to start to get some phone calls from others about.
I'd be happy to do that. Essentially, some time ago now, more than 6 months ago, Dan can correct me if my dating is off, we began to get initial communications from Hubble Development requesting a waiver of your rules and regulations about the width of right-of-way for our mains. Essentially, obviously, from a development standpoint, the narrower that right-of-way is, the greater opportunity they have to configure they're platting to sell more units. Council has certainly reminded me on a number of occasions in my 5 years here about our strict liability under Iowa law for damages associated with the failure of our water mains. So our business interest in increasing that responsibility by allowing closer movement of residential units, some of which are townhouses and have very little separation, to our water mains and our ability to service and maintain in narrow right-of-ways without affecting the property is severely limited. So we have rejected those requests from a staff standpoint up to this point. Certainly made it clear to Hubble Development they had the opportunity to approach the board if they had concerns about that. And from my vantage, our last communication as staff with them has probably been 4 months ago or so. It's been.
I think it's probably 6 to 8 months. It's been a long time. It was last fall.
So our assumption is that they have understood our position and decided not to appeal that to you yet, at least. But the staff position is very clear that your rules and regs talk about the minimum right-of-way that has to be provided to protect our mains and to allow easy service, and we have no interest in, from a staff's perspective, in waiving that. You obviously are empowered to be able to do that and redirect it, but they've not approached us to approach you, if you will, to get on your agenda concerning that issue.
Is that under public streets or?
Yes, largely that's what we're talking about, David. I've been reminded by our operations, and I'm sorry, go ahead, Dan.
It's actually some of both. They were going to put some of it in right-of-way, and then some of it was going to be an easement. And so we have a minimum width of the easement, which is 40 feet that's required. And so
They essentially wanted 30.
they wanted 30.
So obviously you're increasing your risk as you move the facilities closer to the mains.
It's publicly maintained property.
It would be publicly maintained as far as the water main. The city has other agreements that they were
But I
trying
mean,
to work out.
It's city property it's under.
Not on the
No.
easement. On the easement side, it would be private property. But there would be easements to our benefit. The real point is the size of the protection around our mains. They're asking us to shrink that so that they can increase the density. But that's, in staff's view, shifting the liability and greater risk to our ratepayers generally. Ted has a great concern about whether we can even work in a 30-foot easement or right-of-way. It makes no difference. In a 30-foot protected area with our equipment, we cannot. So we would have equipment concerns, responsiveness concerns, all of which, again, continue to raise
Would they have a
risks.
choice? They could just make it all private land and just
No.
take care of it?
No, different issue. We have some developers that try to do that from time to time, but we are the private main world that you're thinking of, David, in this kind of circumstance is something we will not allow.
They can't even have private water mains under there.
No, I don't mean to say that. There are a lot of private water mains out there.
That's
You know,
what I was
think of,
thinking.
think of,
Nobody wants that responsibility.
yeah, they essentially want it both ways.
That's what I'm saying.
They want a narrower corridor for us to assume responsibility.
And
we're
somebody
pushing
else
back
takes
on
the
that.
responsibility.
I'm sorry,
Somebody else takes it. We
Correct.
take it, okay.
correct,
They-
again.
They don't want to put a private water main in there. They want us to have it, but they want to have their,
Gets pretty complicated now.
yeah.
Go ahead, Dan, give it a
Yeah.
shot.
Well,
They certainly have
they
it.
would do that if we would allow them to, but the problem is that according to state, they would have to then hire a licensed operator, and they would have to pass tests, and they would have to become a water utility to legally do that. And so that's another piece of this that we've gotten into. We've had lots of discussion with DNR, so it's very complicated. So that's one of the reasons not to. The other thing is staff, we recommend that we think we have a responsibility, and you have to decide that for yourself, but at least as staff, I think you've given us that responsibility for us to look out for our customers for the future, and we don't really think it's in the best interest of that future customer.
The reason I wanted to bring this to the full board is because I don't want it to come back that we have this great development that's going to impact the tax base, but at the last minute, Waterworks held it up. This has been an ongoing, long discussion, and so if you are approached, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew there had been discussions. Rita told me that they had a proposed solution that they were going to be coming back again. This was probably September, that the developer would just provide us with a piece of equipment to get into a smaller space. So,
Which, you know, and we
now she's from the city, not Hubble, but I mean, so this.
And we did have those discussions, that was unacceptable to us.
And, you know, and going forward, you have to maintain that or replace it, and you have to do other things. The bigger part, and it goes back to what we talked about under F, was, I think, was, you know, we want a standardized system, and we want to have some predictability in development and other things, and we don't want to have people going out to try to work on these things, and it's already tough enough, I think, to go out there in January at 5 below and try to work on a broken water main or something. And
putting too much of an emphasis on a market, it goes right down the lines of what you're talking about. This is also a pretty clear division of interest between the city of Des Moines, which has, you know, every reason to want the tax base and want to develop this area, understandably. We have a narrower concern here, and it's the protection of our system and the protection of our ratepayers from strict liability when these mains fail, and they will fail. They'll not fail probably in our lifetime, but they will fail, and having units that are that close to them obviously exponentially raises the risk of damage.
I will say,
that your successors will be responsible for.
so because I don't often get to my training, my urban planning training, focus on economic development. Oftentimes, economic development makes promises that other departments can't necessarily keep because there's that interest to get that agreement done, and then, you know, then we've got standards that might not be foreseen by.
Dan and his staff have spent a lot of time on this, as I'm sure you all are aware, and they have held the line and essentially initially discussions with Hubble Development, and then as Hubble Development sought a different review, a number of us have been involved in it, so thanks, Dan, for your work.
Well, thanks for kind of a review of that, but it's moving ahead quickly, that development. So. Anything else?